Dear colleagues, let's start again on session 2, the enlargement process. We already discussed a bit during the past session because Ukraine has brought the debate about EU enlargement back to the forefront. From the beginning, enlargement was important as an instrument to promote peace, prosperity, and also economic stability. At the same time, it raises questions about, of course, the internal reforms, and Belgium is also prepared to support the candidate countries to their efforts to join also the Union, but the EU has to be future-proof. And that's a challenge. We have to be prepared so that its policy, finance, and internal decision-making process are ready for the enlargement. This also requires an open discussions, as we know, in the field of common foreign policy, of replacing the required unanimity by qualified majority voting, so that we can act more quickly and swiftly to the different crises we are with. So, as I said already in my introductions, we don't need only firefighters, but we also need architects. These were the words of Jacques Delors. And so we have to make Europe again future-proof, ready for the enlargement. And I think we have a lot of interesting speakers, 3 to be specific. But before we start, I just want to mention that you can already register your request to speak following the instructions. You already know how it works now. You can find it again on the little paper on your table. But I'm very honored that we have today also Mrs. Federica Mogherini. She's now rector of the College of Europe, which is also situated in Bruges. But I remember that she was also very present during the past EPCs, always present, which is very important, as you know, for the parliamentarians. So very happy to see you again, Mrs. Federica Mogherini, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Thank you. I would like, through you, to thank the Belgian presidency and the parliamentary dimension of it, in particular for 2 reasons. First of all, for inviting me in this conference. Indeed, for me, it has always been a very important setup. Not only when I was High Representative and Vice President, but also when I was member of the Italian Parliament. So I feel home. I feel double at home. Actually, I feel home 3 times. Because also you brought this Inter-Parliamentary Conference to Bruges, which is now my new home as Director of the College of Europe. So welcome to Bruges, if I may. And thank you for inviting me, in particular in this panel. I'll share with you what I think and what I see as an individual, as a person, in my new capacity as Director of the College. I will do this maybe with a little bit of an unconventional thinking, if you allow me. I was quite free even when I was in office in the European Union, even more so today. First of all, I think that we have seen and we are seeing today, in this last year and a half, I would say, a radical shift in the mindset of the European Union. I think also in the majority of member states and national parliaments, but we will see this in the debate, from seeing the enlargement as a merit-based process mainly in the interest of the candidate countries that are joining the European Union, to an approach that sees the enlargement process as in our own interest in the European Union. And I think this is a very healthy and smart shift of mindset. I believe that we have to consider these 2 starting points. This as a first one, the enlargement, the restarted engine of the enlargement process is first and foremost responding to our own interest in the European Union, and our own geopolitical interest, Coming from the previous session, it is quite clear that being part of the European Union is not only a guarantee for security and resilience and stability for the countries that join the Union, but also for the rest of the continent. And we cannot afford anymore having any vacuum in the continent. And the second mindset shift that I think is happening, and I hope will accelerate even further, is to consider actually enlargement not as an enlargement, but as the process to complete the integration of our continent. I never liked the word enlargement, to tell you the truth, because it supposed that there is a center and that center enlarges to the periphery. I think that, and I speak being a national of a founding member state, I think that actually what we have done over the last 70 years is actually a process of reintegration of a continent that has been divided in many different waves of history, and that in many different ways of history has been then reintegrated in a political and economic process. And I believe that today it is a matter of completing the integration of the European continent to those European countries that are already European but are not members of the European Union. This is also why I never liked the expression of the European perspective. The Western Balkans, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia don't need a European perspective. It's already Europe. They need a European Union membership perspective, and they need a credible one, I believe, and we need them to have a credible one. The second point I would like to make, so the first one was the strategic relevance of enlargement and the need for a mindset shift on first, understanding that it is in our own interest, and second, to understand that it is about reunifying our continent. The second point I would like to make is on the conditionality. We always refer to the fact that this is a merit-based process. I think it has become quite evident in the last 5 to 10 years that sometimes the conditionality was not only the conditionality required on the candidate countries side, but sometimes we had our own conditionality inside the European Union and inside member states. And sometimes we have seen candidate countries doing what they needed to do, but not always on the European Union side there was enough responsiveness in the past to welcome them or to accelerate the process because of, I would say, a lack of conditions or sometimes political conditions on the European Union side. I believe that it is very important to stress the fact that the reforms are conditions in the candidate countries. Personally, and this is my personal opinion, I do not think that the European Union needs, as an absolute must, institutional reforms before admitting 1 or 2 or 3 new member states. We were 28. I can tell you personally, I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Council for 5 years. In average, I would say twice a month in all the different council formations. We were 28. We were 28 still with the UK part of the council after the Brexit referendum with unanimity, and still we managed to take decisions every time. So I don't think that the institutional reforms are a must and a precondition to enlarge. I think enlargement would be a very good opportunity to do institutional reforms that we might need anyway, but I would be very, very worried if we create a certain conditionality on our side that we would not accept new member states unless and until we do internal reforms, because I fear that this might be a boomerang or a self-fulfilling prophecy on our side. So obviously, there will be 1 or 2 elements that would definitely need to be looked at, more, I think, than institutional reforms, and that is the budget, own resources, and the review of all policies, especially if we imagine a European Union that turns from 27 to 37. But I do not see why, personally, and again, I know that this might sound provocative to some, but maybe welcome from others. I don't see why it shouldn't be possible to have 1, 2 additional member states, even in very short time, once the conditionality is met on the candidate countries' side. Last point I would like to make, as Director of the College of Europe today, you expect it from me and allow me. I think that a key element of this process is education and training. And this is why I'm so proud that together with the Commission, thanks to the Commission support, but also thanks to the Council support, the College of Europe is opening for the first time after 30 years a new branch in Tirana in Albania, specifically focused on the European transformation and integration process, specifically focused at training and forming a generation not only of young people in the countries that will enter the European Union, but also in the member states, to know much more about how the European Union completes the integration process and how to connect with those countries and with those societies and institutions that are not part of the European Union yet. This is a work that we already do a lot here in Bruges and in Natolin, where we have the other campus in Poland. Having students and officials trained from 50 countries, so well beyond the EU member states. But I'm very proud that we are now together working on the establishment of a campus and a program, an academic program that is exclusively focused at supporting, I hope, what will be the next wave of integration of the European continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Mogherini, for talking about not enlargement, but reintegration. Well understood, interesting perspective. And now we give the floor to Mr. Gert-Jan Koopman. You work very hard today, so you're in our next session also. So I give you the floor about also this team.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's good to be back in the second panel this morning. I promise you there won't be a third panel. No, let me pick up on a few of the points which Frederica just mentioned. I mean, I think enlargement as a policy is back, and I think it's fair what she said, that for a long time there was a reluctance to take enlargement as a policy seriously on the side of some of our member states, and progress between 2013 and 2022 was very slow. We didn't enlarge, we didn't extend the union in over a decade, and whilst some of the candidate countries didn't maybe reform as much as they should, it's also true, it's fair to say that on our own side in the EU there were some hesitations. I think what has really changed fundamentally in the wake of the Russian war of aggression is that this issue has moved away, and therefore the policy is back. It means, however, that the reforms in the countries, in the candidate countries, remain essential, and that we need to work much more intensively with them, like we did in previous decades, to ensure that they can make these reforms. There's an important point here, which is that the acquis, so the corpus of legislation nowadays, is at least 3 times larger than it was back in the early 2000s. So enlargement is hard. It's not a straightforward process. It is like, I sometimes compare it with rewriting the operating system of a computer. We all have these updates which you from time to time need to install, and it really changes quite fundamentally the way an economy and even in some respects a society works. And this takes a bit of time. It's a process that requires a sustained effort, a consensus across the political spectrum in a candidate country to succeed. I would also say that given the size of the challenge, there has been an innovation in enlargement policy which we don't talk about enough, but which is actually materially very important, which is that there are elements of progressivity already today that make it easier for the candidate countries to come closer. Many candidate countries already today participate in EU programs. Under the energy community and the transport community, many of the countries in the Western Balkans already participate to some extent in the internal transport market and in the internal energy market. Ukraine as well. So we see that it is essential to bring these countries closer as they move towards us. And I think that is a development which, in the present geopolitical context, is actually particularly relevant, and I would expect that we will strengthen it. In fact, the Commission has proposed to do so for the Western Balkans as part of the Western Balkans growth plan, which we issued last November. I would also say that the energy in the countries themselves is a lot higher than it was maybe a few years ago, because everyone sees that enlargement might happen, and some of the countries are actually a little bit closer to the finish line than others. And here I would like to echo something that Frederica said. It is not excluded that some of these countries might get close much more quickly than some people think. Not all, but some. And then, of course, the question for us will be, what do we do in those circumstances? I don't want to prejudge the debate that will no doubt need to take place about internal reforms in the EU, and these internal reforms are necessary independent of enlargement, as we have said many times. But one could indeed argue whether enlarging by one or two countries would be conditional, would necessitate such reforms. That is not something that is immediately, intuitively obvious. So the dynamics of enlargement have also changed fundamentally with the trio in the East. Enlargement used to be, for a long time, a story of the Western Balkans and Turkey after the standstill at which the negotiations with Turkey came in 2018. It was an exclusive affair of the Western Balkans, but now with the trio in the East, this has changed dramatically, and it has given a new impetus to the process. Fourthly, we have learned lessons from enlargement. Enlargement is not a policy that is universally popular in some of our own member states. I'm not sure what would happen if we completed the negotiations and if a government decided to put up a vote, a referendum, if it were to call a referendum on enlargement in one of our member states. It's not clear what would happen. So we have put a lot of emphasis under the renewed enlargement policy on what we call fundamentals first: rule of law, anti-corruption, really the foundations of a free and modern, open European society. And that remains, of course, critical given the number of countries we are talking about. And on this, I think there is a very interesting juxtaposition of the geostrategic need of enlargement on the one hand, but equally on the other hand, the need to stick with the merit-based process. We cannot sacrifice the merit-based process, the need for these fundamental reforms to be taken on the altar of geopolitics. That will not work. That will not be tolerated, I think, by the people who ultimately need to stand for this. So that is why I repeat what I said earlier on: enlargement is a hard process. It's not something that can be achieved overnight and very easily. Now, in terms of where we are today, after the historic decisions taken by the European Council in December last year to decide to open negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, and also to do this in respect of Bosnia-Herzegovina once the necessary degree of compliance with the membership criteria is met, we are, of course, in a process where the reforms continue at pace. And where we work together extremely closely with the countries concerned to take this forward. I think that it is equally clear that the foreign policy dimension of enlargement, in other words, CFSP alignment with our common foreign and security policy, is gaining traction and is becoming even more important in this context. And you see this in the debates about some of the countries concerned, where we de facto require progress in CFSP alignment going forward. Final point I would make is that because time is of the essence, and we cannot have any trade-offs between the geopolitical necessity and the merit-based process, progressive integration and drawing them closer remains fundamental. I already, in the previous session, mentioned the Ukraine plan, which should also be seen as an economic reform plan linked with the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement which Ukraine and Moldova, for that matter, enjoy with the EU. So it provides an anchor for progressive integration already. We have proposed a similar approach for the Western Balkans, where we have set out 7 areas of internal market integration that could bring the countries much closer, much more quickly, combined with a facility that would indeed spur economic reforms and investments, thereby together holding out the prospect of a doubling of the size of these economies in the next decade as they integrate amongst themselves and with the EU economically. I think this is something which out there we need to look at very, very carefully. So we need to be a bit less focused only on the enlargement process as such. We need to look at the economics around it, the integration of what it means for citizens, the people-to-people dimension, including education for that matter, and to redouble our efforts. The final point I would make in this respect is that there are a lot of concerns about budgetary implications, but the reality is, if I look at the envelopes that we are putting on the table today, they remain rather modest in the wider scale of the overall budget, and certainly in light of the geopolitical and geostrategic challenges, quite affordable in light of the needs that we have. And they have also been prioritized by European heads of states and government in the revision of our financial framework, which was adopted on the 1st of February this year. So all in all, these are very, very important times for enlargement. They will have to be approached with a fresh mind, with a degree of cooperation and collaboration with the candidate countries that I think will look more like it looked in the 2000s than what it looked like 5 years ago. And we have reason to be optimistic if I see how much has changed in terms of reforms, in terms of how we think about enlargement in the past 2 years. So with that, I want to leave a message of optimism and hope for this esteemed assembly, and I look forward also to your comments and possible questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gert-Jan, to put all the elements on the table, the optimistic ones, the hopeful ones, but also the hard ones. It's important to have a balanced view. I think you have an interesting contribution as well. And now I'm very happy to announce also Steven van Hekke. He's a professor in European politics at KU Leuven. Leuven is my hometown, so I feel a bit at home with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Dank u wel, beste Els. Dear members of parliament, it's a great honor for me to speak to you very shortly about a major topic in EU integration history. It's great to be in Bruges. Next week I will be in Skopje, North Macedonia, and last week I was in Brussels, invited by Flemish journalists who want to make a video on the enlargement of the EU. But journalists need to make this visible. So that was a bit of a problem. They had no idea. And I said, let's meet next to the European Parliament. Why? Because next to the European Parliament, you have 2 segments of the Berlin Wall. And that is the first point I want to make. What happened on the 24th of February 2022 is of the same significance as the Berlin Wall fell on the 9th of November 1989. We are very conscious about the short-term effects, but we are still in denial about the long-term paradigm shift of the EU. The full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed everything, so also in enlargement policy. It's a turning point. There is a before and there is an after, and you can never go back. The same happened again with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Before, there was enlargement fatigue, as we all know. Sometimes I call it a lost decennium, because not much happened after Croatia joined in 2013. Now we have a new window of opportunity, a momentum, and the question is, of course, still, will it be taken? My second point is more at the meso level, how to convince the EU to enlarge, and particularly the domestic audiences of the so-called old member states, because that is the tricky thing. We don't need to convince the member states of Central and Eastern Europe. The question is how to convince domestic public opinion in the old member states, particularly Western Europe. I think there are three reasons. They have already been mentioned. The first one is the strategic one. It's about geopolitics. It's about reuniting the European continent, making it more safe and stable. The second, how to convince domestic public opinion in Western Europe, is the business opportunities. It's an economic challenge. When I'm talking here in Flanders to students or other interested citizens, I give them the example. I rather see a Flemish bank opening a new ATM machine in a central square in Kiev than a Ukrainian bank opening a new office at the Grand Place in Brussels. So it's also in the interest, in the economic interest, I think, to have a stable internal market also on a wider continental scale. The third is the most difficult, but it's the most important. We have to bring a clear, honest, transparent perspective to the younger generations in these member states. In the short run, it might be for old Western Europe a good idea that brain drain helps to solve our problems on the labor market, but in the mid and the long term, it is a catastrophe. So we need to bring a clear message to them that it's worth being a nurse, worth being an engineer, worth being a teacher in applicant EU and member states. We will only be able to convince them if they have a clear example. In the short term, that's my third and last point, how can we summarize what happened in the last 2 years, which is quite spectacular, all the different steps that have been taken? For me, it's a no-brainer that these applicant member states will join, so it has to take place, and also conditionality, it has already been mentioned, and the accession criteria are a no-brainer. We cannot give in as far as the EU is concerned. The real questions are the timing. Without a clear deadline, honestly, it will not work. A deadline is fine. You can even miss a deadline, but you need a deadline. It's up to the Commission, not to the European Council President, but it's up to the Commission, and I hope they will be more courageous in the next term. The second one is, of course, we have 10 countries, but we also need to distinguish. For Ukraine, we might need some creativity in thinking about transition measures, but that's totally different from Montenegro. Montenegro can easily join, and it would also have a new impetus, I think, in the Western Balkan regions. The third question is political leadership. Because after all, even if the criteria are met, think about even what happened with Bulgaria and Romania. They met all the criteria of the Schengen zone, but it's still a political decision. The same applies with EU and membership. So what we currently lack is political leaders who are willing to convince, mentally prepare their audience that at some stage in 5, 10, 15 years, the EU will count 30, 35 members. Last time, it took the EU 15 years before the Big Bang enlargement took place, and it took 20 years before the Lisbon Treaty came into force. This is a tricky thing, it has already been mentioned. I agree with Rector Mogherini, I'm not in favor of linking these two issues. The EU should do its homework. You don't need enlargement to be convinced that some internal homework needs to be done, and you don't need internal homework to be convinced that enlargement should take place. Both should take place, ideally at the same time, but the one cannot wait for the other. Those who link them, those who make the one conditional vis-à-vis the other, are probably or lack the courage to say that they are not in favor of new member states, because then they can easily hide behind the lack of EU internal reform. compared to what happened 30 years ago, I think this time we have less time than 50 years waiting for new members and 20 years for treaty reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Steven. Thank you, Professor Van Hekke, for your interesting view. We feel addressed when you talk about political leadership. We have a lot of politicians in this hall, so we are very curious what you think about these different interventions, and to make some suggestions, it's also welcome. So it's now time for the panel debate. You know already that there are 90 seconds and no more, because we are always, now again, a bit late in the program, so please stick to this time, so everyone can express also oneself. So I first give the floor to my dear Belgian colleague, André Flahault. Vous avez la parole.
Merci Madame la Présidente, et remercier aussi les différents orateurs. L'élargissement, tout d'abord, ce n'est pas une question de marché, c'est d'abord une question de personnes. Ensuite, sans que cela ne constitue un frein à un élargissement nécessaire, il faut sans doute, au niveau des institutions européennes, avoir le courage de revoir certains fonctionnements qui s'apparentent très fort à de la bureaucratie et qui ne sont pas perçus ni appréciés du tout par les citoyens où qu'ils se trouvent. Dès lors, il faut aussi mieux tenir compte, me semble-t-il, de la position des parlements nationaux dans le débat tel qu'il est. Parce que nous sommes aux prises directes avec ces citoyens. Et il faut aussi tenir compte des pays qui attendent depuis longtemps et qui ne sont peut-être pas en phase de réaliser ou de rencontrer totalement les obligations formulées. Et il y a un élément important, Madame Monegrini, vous l'avez dit, il faut assurer une formation citoyenne, à la citoyenneté européenne, à la compréhension des valeurs sans imposer des modèles nulle part. Et si on avait peut-être aussi commencé, et vous savez ce que ça veut dire aussi, une formation commune pour nos défenses européennes, on aurait peut-être aujourd'hui une défense européenne plus performante et moins dépendante de l'OTAN. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Monsieur Flahault. I now give the floor to Zsolt Nemet, our dear colleague from Hungary.
Thank you very much, Els and Federica and Mr. Koopman for this panel. To all three of you, congratulations to Belgium. As you know, we have got a Spanish, Hungarian, Belgian trio. The cooperation inside the trio is very smooth. As you know, the Hungarian presidency is coming up in the second half of this year. And I would like to inform the colleagues who are here that the Inter-Parliamentary Conference is going to take place in Budapest on the 9th and the 10th of September this year. You are all welcome. 24 is the 20th anniversary of the 10-country enlargement when Hungary became a member. And enlargement is not just a Hungarian, but it is a trio priority, as it is reflected at this meeting. And I would like to underline the important statement which was said just before, that the geopolitical aspect and the merit-based aspect of enlargement is very closely intertwined. For this reason, we are planning to have a very dynamic enlargement agenda. We plan to have a Balkan summit and the European Political Community Summit as well in Hungary. And I would like to welcome our friends from the Ukraine, Moldova, Bosnia as candidate countries, and Georgia candidate status should also soon happen. Enlargement is back, as it was said, and we have to owe this to Mr. Putin, because this kind of understanding of the geopolitical importance of enlargement owes a lot to the aggression. And I would like to thank as well to the European Commission, Mr. Koopman and Mr. Commissioner Várhelyi. I think we should make the first country group a member of the European Union.
Because we are running out of time. Thank you.
Very, very quickly, I would like to undersign to this strategic approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and please also the others stick to the time because we have also still lunch to do. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Zovko from the European Parliament.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm very happy as well to see Madame Mogherini here, who was a former High Representative who started from Sarajevo with the messaging that enlargement is a security, peace and security issue, and it still is. I remember in 2014 when you gave this message and when you did a really good dynamic, so we should not forget Bosnia and Herzegovina and peace and stability issue that is being at stake there. I came from Banja Luka the other day where a new bishop was replacing Bishop Komarica, Bishop Maric, and it broke my heart going to and being there, taking the roads that are really the medieval ones. And I've seen, coming from Croatia, I've seen how backwards this country has become in the recent few years. And watching television, watching a program, the hybrid propaganda and influence from Russia, from Turkey, from all the other countries is playing dangerous games. And I think that Bosnia and Herzegovina, if we don't open accession talks, we have not learned any lessons in the past years since the Dayton Peace Agreement. We have to open the negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have to play finally preventive diplomacy, and we have to bring this dynamic because enlargement is also a political tool for peace and stability. I would not agree that we should give some other countries a chance because they all have a harder diplomacy, but we with our American partners have made a hard-won peace, and if we don't show that this bridge builder country is a key for stability in Western Balkan, we have not learned any lessons. And we cannot do anything then in Eastern Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to a colleague of Austria, Reinhold Lopatka.
Thank you very much, dear Chair. In session one, we focused on Ukraine, which has now the candidate status, which is an important sign of solidarity, of course. Now I want to direct our attention to the Western Balkans. Together with Croatia, Czechia, Greece, Italy, Slovakia and Slovenia, Austria started the initiative, Friends of the Western Balkans. We share a special responsibility for keeping the Western Balkans high on the EU political agenda and for supporting the region's EU path. We call for a renewed vigor and acceleration of the accession process, and we call on EU institutions to present a clear agenda for gradual and accelerated integration with concrete implementation steps based on fair conditionality and the principle of own merits. As the region is exposed to destabilizing factors such as hybrid threats, disinformation, or illegal migration, this agenda could give fresh impetus for deeper cooperation in the field of the common foreign and security policy. Enhanced cooperation, we think, would make us more effective in facing external pressures and the countering Russia and other harmful narratives in the region. Therefore, we should speed up, not only in this speech, but also in the enlargement process. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Nikola Mazar from Croatia.
Poštovani predsjedavajući, uvaženi gosti, kolegice i kolege zastupnici, kao najmlađa država članica, a prošlo je već 10 godina, vratili smo temu proširenja na dnevni red Europske unije tijekom predsjedanja 2020. A danas, nakon ruske agresije, ona je poprimila nove okvire u zaštiti europske stabilnosti i sigurnosti i postala prioritetna za našu politiku. Republika Hrvatska otvoreno podupire proces proširenja. Hrvatska na proširenje gleda kao na ulaganje u budućnost, mir, stabilnost i sigurnost. Hrvatska je pozdravila odluku Europskog vijeća iz prosinca 2023. o otvaranju pristupnih pregovora s Ukrajinom i Moldovom, kao i dodjeljivanje statusa kandidata Gruziji. Također, pozdravljamo potpunu i nedvosmislenu predanost Europske unije za članstvo Zapadnog Balkana, te i ovom prilikom pozivamo na ubrzanje pristupnog procesa na temelju vjerodostojnih reformi, pravedne uvjetovanosti i primjeni načela vlastitih zasluga. Ovom prilikom želio bih podsjetiti kako su ministri vanjskih poslova Hrvatske, Austrije, Češke, Grčke i Slovačke, Italije i Slovenije usvojili izjavu iz Gottfrieda, prijatelja Zapadnog Balkana, kojom se daje snažna podrška proširenju Unije i potvrđuje puna posvećenost europskoj budućnosti Zapadnog Balkana. Prošlogodišnja odluka da se i Bosni i Hercegovini dodijeli status kandidata temeljila se na strateškim promišljanjima, te smo uvjereni da raste svijest kako je politika proširenja najmoćniji stabilizacijski instrument Europske unije.
Thank you. I give the floor to Haris Georgiadis from Cyprus.
Thank you. I'm all in favor of enlargement. In fact, I do agree that enlargement is synonymous to the completion of our union. But I would insist on the reforms, on the conditionality. In fact, the benefit of enlargement is this transformational effect that it implies, the fact that countries reform and adapt. I would be very, very nervous if, for instance, we were to accept as a member a country which does not respect human rights, or which in its foreign policy is aligned, for instance, to Putin or to Hamas. But what an achievement it would be if through the enlargement process, that country would become a true liberal democracy, would align its foreign policy with the European foreign policy, and it would effectively become truly European. That's when enlargement should happen, and that's why we should be insistent on a merit-based, reform-oriented enlargement. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have to mention that we close the list because we have still 20 speakers to come. I'm very glad that you're interested in the debate, but we have some time schedule also. And now I give the floor to Tonino Picula from the European Parliament.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under conducive circumstances, the Western Balkans has potential to solve its long-standing internal and bilateral problems through a more convincing democratic transformation and integration into the EU. But if these processes are blocked in such increasingly tense social conditions in the European Union, an open war in our neighborhood, along with the malign influence of various rivals of the European Union, I would not exclude new tough challenges. That means that the slogan of the Belgian presidency, protect, strengthen, prepare, is an excellent choice. As far as further enlargement is concerned, I would like to single out some key points. Every candidate country should be judged on their own merit. Our fundamental values, such as the rule of law and democratic standards, must be pillar of our assessment if the country is ready to join the European Union. Building bridges, highways is welcome, of course, but respect for fundamental values must be a precondition for that. European Union is not only a common market, but a union of values and community of shared risks too. Once the candidate country fulfills all the criteria, there should be no political delays to its succession. Necessary European Union internal reforms must take place in parallel. European Union enlargement is one of the most successful EU politics, and it must continue. On that note, we expect concrete results from the Council meeting later in March. Thank you.
Thank you. And now give the floor to Kimmo Kiljunen from Finland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like very much to enjoy Frederica's position concerning reintegration of Europe. True, Ukraine is part of Europe, and it's marvelous that we have started the negotiations for the membership in the European Union, including also Moldova and candidate status for Georgia. I am also very pleased to hear that you don't forget the Western Balkans, but I will add actually in the picture two other Eastern Partnership countries for discussion of the future of Europe in itself. Armenia, after this catastrophe in Nagorno-Karabakh, they are looking for Europe today. They are looking for Europe, and actually the government has some merits also in terms of human rights, democracy, and rule of law. But even further, I'm brave enough to think also about Belarus. We in Council of Europe have actually a constant presence of Belarusians headed democratic forces headed by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. They are permanently present there, and they have expressed strongly the view of European perspective. We strongly support that one. We are investigating that very seriously in terms of Council of Europe side. But I actually propose to you as a chair here now that next meeting of us, we should invite also democratic forces of Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, to address to us, and we can seriously start also discuss with them institutional way, if it's feasible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then I give the floor to Dimitrios Mansos from Greece.
Yes, thank you. 4 points I would like to add. First point, we welcome the revival of the enlargement or reintegration debate regarding Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, but also the West Balkans, whose European perspective was agreed and promised in Thessaloniki, Greece, 21 years ago. Second point, we feel that the European Union should actively support its enlargement process in a structured and binding framework based on merit, namely reforms, with no exceptions from the Copenhagen criteria and the values our Union enshrines. Third point, the old dilemma, enlargement or deepening, has already been answered. We need both. We should closely monitor and ensure reforms regarding rule of law, independence of the judiciary, and protection of minorities' rights. The case of the Greek minority in Albania sadly highlights the work that still needs to be done. Fourth and last point, the enlargement should be seen as a crucial part of a new European architecture, to borrow Ms. van Hoof's term. We need to have a more coherent foreign security policy, especially given the severe geopolitical shifts, the barbaric invasion of Russia in Ukraine, and the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza. The European Union should revisit its policies towards its direct environment, the southeastern neighborhood, to tackle aggression and revisionism and safeguard peace and security. And the enlargement could and should serve as a significant step towards this direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Gian Giacomo Calovini from Italy.
Sì, grazie, Madam Chair. Mi conceda la lingua italiana per essere più veloce nel mio intervento, in cui poter esprimere, credo a nome di tutta la delegazione italiana, una posizione assolutamente favorevole ad un allargamento. Siamo, penso, fortemente convinti tutti che nuove sfide possano essere felici, come lo sono state in passato quelle nei confronti dei paesi baltici, nei paesi dell'est, e quindi siamo fortemente convinti che quello che è stato un successo ieri possa essere un successo domani nei confronti dei Balcani, nei confronti di altri paesi quali l'Ucraina ovviamente e la Moldova. Mi conceda poi anche un ragionamento da italiano e quindi un paragone calcistico in merito al fatto che oggi forse stiamo vivendo un momento molto particolare. Da una parte del campo ci sono valori come la democrazia, lo Stato di diritto, la libertà, e dall'altra parte del campo invece ci sono paesi, ideologie che negano di fatto questi nostri valori. E, cosa che forse non è stata ancora detta oggi, è innegabile che ci sono state anche nel passato e anche attualmente dei paesi e delle forze esterne che stanno cercando di minare gli equilibri dell'Europa e che dobbiamo in tutti i modi cercare di contrastare. Come è stato detto, e vado verso la conclusione, è assolutamente giusto non sacrificare il merito, non concedere assolutamente un allargamento senza delle condizioni che sono fondamentali, e nello stesso tempo però credo che sia anche molto importante evitare all'interno dell'Europa una sorta di processo nei confronti della nostra storia, nei nostri valori che rappresentiamo e che dobbiamo rappresentare in modo orgoglioso, perché di fatto sono alla base, saranno sempre alla base di un lungo e secolare racconto di storie di successo. Grazie.
Thank you. Then I give the floor to Javier. No, I already had Richard Coles from Latvia.
Ucrania nos ha demostrado que la ampliación es una necesidad estratégica, como también lo es en los Balcanes y en Moldova. Pero hay dos cuestiones que deben resolverse simultáneamente a la ampliación. Por una parte, tenemos un conflicto en el este y tenemos un gran conflicto en el sur. La respuesta que hemos dado en el este es, vamos a decir, suficientemente óptima. Hemos entrenado y hemos dado armas. Pero, en cambio, en el sur hemos actuado con una estúpida política correcta que significa todo, pero non-lethal equipments. Y la UTM ha sido un chiste sangriento, carísimo e inútil, porque no hemos sido capaces de entrenar una sola unidad operativa. Y lo que te dicen los africanos cuando hablan con ellos es: ustedes, cuando son cristianos y blancos, dan armas, pero cuando somos negros y musulmanes no nos dan más que lo políticamente correcto y da como consecuencia Wagner. Y miles de muertos en conflictos donde hemos enviado soldados a la muerte sin un entrenamiento útil. No han servido para nada nuestras UTM. Esto es una de las cuestiones que tienen que resolverse. Salir de lo políticamente correcto para entrar en lo necesariamente útil. La segunda cuestión es la unanimidad, que va muy atrapada por la primera, y consiste en que no podemos tener una unanimidad que significa un bloqueo de resoluciones. Tenemos que ir a mayorías cualificadas. Todo lo demás es poesía y música.
Now I give the floor to Richard Kols from Latvia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's been 20 years since the largest EU enlargement, taking on board 10 countries. Europe still stands strong, united as never before. This is what we echo. So therefore, any hesitation on going further with enlargement with another 10 countries would be a false assumption. Everyone that being part of EU for the past 20 years, we have enjoyed the largest influx in our economy growth, security as well. So therefore, it should be applied to the candidate countries as well. Merit-based approach is absolutely valid. Rule of law, absolutely. But what we have to make a clear 100% conditionality is the full compliance, not partial, but full compliance with the CFSP and CSDP policy. There should be no circumvention on these two policies. If the candidate countries fulfill these, only then we can go further. Because in the geopolitical times we live in, those two policies are paramount, that the candidate countries are actually in line with the EU policy enlarged. Last point I wanted to make, overproduction of regulation. That should be addressed for the incoming new European Parliament and the Commission as well. We have to apply the policy one in, one out, because really we are overproducing sometimes regulations, and that's why putting artificial hurdling blocks to the candidate countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And the next speaker is Laurinas Kasunias from Lithuania.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for pronunciations. It was good option. Russia is modeling two types of neighborhood. One type is totally controlled countries, and if these countries don't want to be controlled, we are trying to make a failed state. So, in our neighborhood, eastern neighborhood, I think we have a coming success story. It's Moldova, named Moldova. And this year, end of this year, will be hard times for Moldova. As you know, we have elections, president elections, which is also like a civilizational, cultural, geopolitical decision, and also referendum on membership into the EU. So be sure Russia will do a lot of things against Moldova, from informational warfare to hybrid pressure, many things. Just a good example, last week the puppet government of Transnistria requested for joining Russian Federation. So it's just beginning of turbulent times. So it's a question of mine, and I want to just highlight that Moldova will be on tension, will be paid by Russia harsh pressure. So do we have a contingency planning? Do we have contingency planning from EU already to be ready, to react, not just with statements, but also to help the government as a state to survive this pressure? Because it's a question: do we have success story or not? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Je donne la parole maintenant à Gilles Baum de Luxembourg.
Thank you. As far as the enlargement or integration process is concerned, it's clear that Russia is trying to widen its circle of influence in the Balkan countries, as we saw during recent elections. Do you think it would be useful, or do you see the possibility of speeding up negotiations with countries with which the European Union is already in talks? I'm thinking in particular of Albania, Northern Macedonia, Montenegro, and not forgetting Moldova. Given the complicated diplomatic relations between Bosnia and Serbia and the Kosovo, do you think that these three countries should join the European Union at the same time?
Thank you so much. Then I give the floor to Carmelo Abela, de Malta.
Thank you very much, Chair. A very interesting discussion, both by the points raised by the panelists and also by colleagues from the floor. I think that concerns and ideas are all valid, and there is no one idea or one concern is better than the other, but all concerns and ideas are valid. So, in my opinion, the process of enlargement, or as Federica said, reintegration of other European countries, boils down to what will prevail in the end. Will the political process prevails on the maybe very long exercise in adopting the acquis? Will the readiness of candidate countries prevail rather than the decision to make the aspirations or their aspirations, especially of the younger generation, given more weight than the process itself? So yes, I totally agree that we need to continue the unwavering commitment of the principles of democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights. But in the end, I think this is a two-way process where we member states need to also learn how to deal with the candidate countries, because this is a two-way process. And my question is this: are we better together or not? And I think we risk not being ready if we continue this waiting. So my conclusion is, yes, that we should not wait for institutional reform, because I believe that the EU will increase its relevance in the neighborhood and even globally if we have more member states. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Titus Corlatian from Romania.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the distinguished panelists for their distinguished contribution. Secondly, for a country like my own, Romania, which indeed, I will take a comment from the panel, is still blocked by a veto by one member state before becoming a full member of the Schengen area, a veto which is violating the EU treaties. For such a country, it's essential what is happening in the neighborhood on both the Balkans and the Eastern Europe, because we are looking with the fundamental interest to see the advancement of the integration on both dimensions, European and Euro-Atlantic integration, what is the case, of course. And this is why we have advocated since the Thessaloniki agenda that the only solution for the Balkan region is the full integration with all actors in the region. We have lost some precious years, unfortunately, because we have lost our, I quote, geopolitical interests, and when we are not present on the pitch, there will be all the time someone else, in our case Russia, to be ready to fill in our vacuum. Secondly, good news about the Balkans. Now we are changing the rhythm. I will add the need, especially in these complex circumstances, the need for a refreshed spirit of the dialogue between EU and Turkey, especially based on the European Commission and EEAS joint communication between EU and Turkey relations. This is a need. Last but not least, good news about Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and Georgia. We are fully supportive for the adoption of the negotiation frameworks with Moldova and Ukraine in April, May this year, and for the first IGC meeting in the first semester of this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I give the floor to Predrag Bakovic from Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, the world is undergoing a major test due to numerous crises, areas, and geopolitical changes. That is why Slovenia believes that the EU must remain highly united and coordinated of these issues also with the aim of strengthening and positioning as a global actor. EU enlargement as a political and transformational process is even more important now in such times we are facing. We believe that expansion both the East and to the Western Balkans is the geostrategic interest of the EU. We fully support Mr. Charles Michel's statement by 2030, we meaning member states and candidates must be ready for expansions. We think that these goals should also be reflected in the next EU strategic agenda for the period of 2024 to 2029 and the long-term EU budget 2028 to 2034. First and foremost, the integration of the countries of the Western Balkans and Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia should remain the EU priority. Slovenia continues with an active policy and supporting on the EU enlargement process in these countries. We want to encourage the process of the countries in the accession process, and we are particularly focused on the accession process of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Hopefully, year 2024 would be an important milestone from the Bosnia and Herzegovina to access to the EU. Dear colleagues, I firmly believe that successful and credible enlargement process is an investment in peace, stability, and prosperity on the whole European continent. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to different candidates. And first I give the floor to Georgia and dear colleague Maka Bochorisvili.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honor for me to represent Georgia as an EU candidate country at this conference today. I would like to express my gratitude for the support that Georgia received from EU member states to achieve this historic decision last December. It is significant that we are discussing EU enlargement at the Security and Defence Conference. This is proof that a safe and secure future for the European Union lies in our unity, while ensuring this unity requires the enlargement of the area of peace, security, and prosperity without delay. Georgia's fight for independence and sovereignty dates back over 30 years. Despite Russia's aggression and its continuous illegal occupation of Georgian regions, we managed to transform the country and secure its place among democratic nations. However, we still have a long way to go to achieve our ultimate goal. We committed ourselves to necessary reforms, and we need strong allies and support on this path. Time is extremely precious, and in today's complex, changing, and unpredictable world, it would be a big geopolitical mistake to waste it on formalities and encountering wrong perceptions. For the success of the enlargement policy, EU membership negotiations should start immediately with all candidate countries. We all need effective mechanisms for integration, removal of existing barriers where possible in order to accelerate the process of economic and political integration of candidate countries into the European Union. It's clear that the success of enlargement policy is directly linked to European security, and it should not be hampered for any reason. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I give the floor to Radu Maria from Moldavia.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thanks to all for supporting our country. Today is a symbolic date because exactly 2 years ago, on March 4, 2022, we have submitted an application to become members of the EU, and our application made in the context of the Russian invasion in Ukraine has made it crystal clear that the EU integration for us is the only alternative, the only choice, the only way we have as a country. And our goal to join the EU is not only about economic growth and infrastructure projects, but it's first of all for us the fastest way to ensure peace in our country and democracy, which is threatened by hybrid means every day from the Kremlin in the wake of the presidential elections and EU referendum that we're going to hold in 2024. Of course, we believe that the negotiation process should be a merit-based, and that's why we were implementing structural reforms, justice reform, fighting corruption, and also we're strengthening our capacity. We recently created a new position of Deputy Prime Minister on EU integration and created a new office of EU integration under the Prime Minister. And all this progress is important in light of the historic EU referendum that we're going to have this year, where Moldovans will decide on their future. And that's why it's so important to have the support from you. And we'll ask you to accelerate the negotiation process and endorse your governments to organize an intergovernmental conference for launching official negotiations with Moldova during Belgian presidency. And last but not least, to approve a growth plan for Moldova to help us stay afloat economically. Thank you so much again for all your support.
Thank you. And next speaker is from Montenegro. It's Duško Štepović.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Dear colleagues, it is with great pleasure that I address you today on the topic of the EU enlargement, particularly concerning the progress and aspirations of Montenegro. First of all, after the election of the new government, the strong political will of Montenegro institutions to intensify the negotiation process and continue achieving tangible results in the field of judiciary particularly is clearly visible and recognized in the latest European Integration Council meeting. The revival of consensus-driven atmosphere and political dialogue in Montenegro signals a significant shift, demonstrating the collective commitment of all stakeholders to address European agenda commitments. Montenegro remains firmly committed to the European perspective of all regional countries toward the EU. Montenegro's accession to the EU would send a powerful message to the region and serve as a clear affirmation of the relevance of the enlargement policy. We hope that the upcoming European Parliament elections and the subsequent institutional completion will not impede our collective efforts toward these goals. Montenegro is an unwavering partner to the EU member states and a responsible NATO ally, as evidenced by our continuous alignment with the common foreign and security policy. In conclusion, Montenegro is fully committed to advancing its European integration process, guided by principles of democracy, rule of law, and transparency. We look forward to furthering our partnership with the EU and achieving our shared objectives for the benefit of our citizens and the entire region. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Hulusi Akar from Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, the EU enlargement has gained new momentum in the face of Russian aggression against Ukraine and the urgent need to create a geopolitical European Union to address European and the global challenges. The EU's relations and cooperation with Turkey on regional issues must not be in a transactional and selective manner. Turkey asks only for fair treatment and a visionary approach in its EU accession process. The abuse of the veto right by some member states against any candidate country is counterproductive and does not solve any problem at all. This approach is also against the EU's interests. Strengthening Turkey's accession perspective can only contribute to the further EU reforms and alignment with the EU. The EU accession process remains a strategic goal for Turkey. Turkey is the longest-standing candidate whose membership contribution to the EU would be the most meaningful, useful, and comprehensive. Meanwhile, we expect the European Union to remove the measures adopted by the Council against Turkey in 2019. At the December EU summit, unlike other candidates, Turkey was not referred to in the enlargement section of the conclusions. Furthermore, the regional report regarding EU-Turkey relations drafted by the High Representative and the Commission was not taken up in the summit and postponed to the next one. We hope that the report will be taken up at the next summit in March and endorsed by the European Council so that we can strengthen our cooperation in all areas, including security, defense, and the foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I give the floor again to Ivana Klimpush from Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Yes, we totally agree with Federica. It is about reintegration of Europe because we are, from Ukraine, returning right now back to historic, cultural, political, and economic map of Europe, from where Russian Federation, being a Russian empire, then Soviet Union, has been trying to erase us for centuries. So we are extremely grateful for the historic decision that has been taken already in December 2023 with regard to opening the accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, and I think geopolitically incredibly important, providing the candidate status to Georgia. And we are all benefiting right now from the process of transformation that we are going through as part of the Euro integration activities. And we are interested that this magnifying lens of attention to the reform agenda in our countries would be even more increasing on behalf of the European Commission, on behalf of the European Union member states. So we are hoping that the negotiation framework would be agreed upon in the Intergovernmental Conference already during the Belgian presidency. So my question to the panel is, what are the expectations on the timeline with regard to these negotiating frameworks being agreed upon? Thank you.
Thank you. And then I give the floor to Vasileios Ypsilantis from Greece.
Thank you, dear Madam Chair, dear colleagues. My country's position is that the EU reforms could proceed in parallel with accession process, and I think that EU is fit to enlargement, but at the same time we have to ensure that the integrity and European acquis, the European Union must enlarge if it wants to stabilize its immediate neighborhood and prevent Russian influence for growing in the region. Both EU and its future member states must be prepared in the required reforms, especially in 3 areas: rule of law, capacity to act, and EU budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then I give the floor to Minas Lidika from Lithuania.
Merci, Madame President, chers colleagues, chers amis. The enlargement policy of the European Union is a success story. This year, on 1st May, we will mark Lithuania's 20 years as a member of the EU. We believe this is success for us, Lithuania, and for the EU as well. Enlargement countries now have a historic window of opportunity. All parties involved, the EU members and aspirants, must accelerate their respective efforts to advance on the enlargement path. Enlargement process should remain merit-based. We expect full adherence of aspirants to common foreign security policy positions and sanctions, as well as setting priorities, rule of law reforms, and public communication on the EU, keeping citizens well informed and resilient to mailing disinformation. We welcome the historic decision by the European Council to start EU accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. The decision to open accession negotiations is well deserved for Ukraine, and as a strategic geopolitical step of the EU side, fulfilling our moral obligation and expanding the zone of security and stability in our neighbor space. Despite brutal threats from Russia, Ukraine and Moldova have effectively implemented the reforms, strengthened their institutions, and firmly aligned with European values and principles. We will continue to support the accession process. Our experts are ready to share Lithuania's enlargement experience with Ukraine and Moldova. Thanks. Ačiū.
Thank you. And then our last speaker is from Turkey, Seda Görenbölük.
Merci Madame la Présidente, chers collègues. L'élargissement a été l'outil de politique étrangère le plus efficace de l'Union pour promouvoir la paix, la stabilité et la démocratie sur l'ensemble du continent. Toutefois, la politique d'élargissement est vulnérable aux fluctuations de l'Europe en général et aux dynamiques internes de l'Union européenne. Nous saluons les récentes évolutions positives de la politique d'élargissement, en particulier le lancement des négociations d'adhésion avec la Moldavie et l'Ukraine, l'octroi du statut de candidat à la Géorgie et les progrès réalisés dans les pays des Balkans. Compte tenu des développements géopolitiques, nous pensons qu'il est impératif de maintenir vivante la perspective de l'Union européenne dans les Balkans et nous soutenons la politique d'élargissement dans la région. Alors que l'Union européenne a récemment fait preuve d'une volonté politique relativement décisive pour l'adhésion en général, nous ne voyons pas une telle volonté pour la Turquie, malheureusement. Au cours de les dernières décennies, les États membres ont de plus en plus influencé la politique d'élargissement en fonction de leurs intérêts nationaux. L'Union européenne doit prendre des mesures concrètes pour empêcher cette nationalisation de la politique d'élargissement. La Turquie est le pays le plus touché par cette politique de nationalisation. Après l'ouverture de négociations en 2005, des blocages politiques manifestes et cachés ont été imposés sur de nombreux chapitres, la plupart liés à la question chypriote. L'Union européenne devrait se renforcer par de nouvelles réformes et procéder à une évaluation complète de la crédibilité de sa politique d'élargissement. La Turquie fait géographiquement, historiquement, politiquement et socialement partie des Balkans et joue un rôle indispensable et constructif dans la stabilité et la prospérité de la région. La Turquie n'est ni un acteur extérieur, ni un concurrent de l'Union européenne dans les Balkans. Nous sommes un partenaire important pour obtenir des résultats qui bénéficieront à l'ensemble de la région. La Turquie et l'Union européenne ont pour objectif commun d'établir et de maintenir la paix et la stabilité et de promouvoir le développement économique dans les Balkans. À ce jour, le maintien de la stabilité dans les Balkans est encore plus important en raison des préoccupations géopolitiques. Le renforcement de la coopération entre la Turquie et l'Union européenne servira mieux cet objectif. Je vous remercie.
Thank you all for your valuable contributions and also respecting time more or less, but in general it was. Thank you so much. And now I give the floor again to our speakers, and I give them a couple of minutes. You don't have to answer all difficult questions, but if you can do. So thank you so much for that. So I give the floor first to Federica Mogherini.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for excellent comments and questions, and I'm very relieved I can leave most of them to others. Premièrement, je voudrais toucher sur la toute première question qui a été posée sur le rôle des parlements nationaux. Je pense que c'est un élément clé. Premièrement pour la composition de cette salle, mais aussi pour le lien avec le travail que les parlements nationaux font. Pas seulement pour représenter l'opinion publique, mais aussi pour former l'opinion publique. Il y a une responsabilité politique et institutionnelle que je trouve est très importante. Et si la politique d'élargissement de l'Union européenne est effectivement maintenant redémarrée, à redémarrer le moteur, je pense que le rôle des parlements nationaux va être de plus en plus important dans les années qui viennent. Donc j'espère et je pense que cette Assemblée va être utile aussi pour permettre aux différents comités des parlements nationaux de jouer à plein leur rôle, surtout sur ce qui concerne les valeurs, la citoyenneté européenne, l'identité européenne même. And on this, let me switch to English. I think that there is an elephant in the room that has been hinted at but not really mentioned explicitly, and I think it is going to be very important for us all collectively to be honest on some of the challenges we're facing. Sometimes we hear that we should be careful in enlarging and getting new member states because there is a risk of lowering our standards on rule of law, human rights, and democracy. I believe that we should, for sure, keep this criteria extremely high on our agenda, as the institutions are already doing. But I also believe that it would be quite an illusion to imagine that these are challenges only for the newcomers and not for all other member states, because I believe that it is going to be very important. It is very important for all citizens of the European Union to be 100% sure that being it a founding member state or being the newly entered member states, our standards on rule of law, democracy, and rule of law are the utmost, the most respected one. Second point I would like to touch upon is the question on enlargement as a peace and security issue. Indeed, it is, I think, now more than ever. To me, it was evident also before, but I think that today it's evident also across the continent, not only in terms of prevention of conflicts and security threats, but also in terms of reconciliation. And in the Balkans, I think this is so evident that we wouldn't even need to, I think, spend much time on that. Third question I would like to address was a question that was directly put. Would we need to speed up on some new member states joining? Would we need to envisage a group coming all together at once in? Personally, again, it's merit-based, and it's others' job today to work on that. Personally, I believe that given the importance of the geopolitical imperative, as you mentioned, Gert-Jan, on the accession processes, and given the fact that some of the candidate countries are already NATO members and fully aligned on CFSP, I hope, and I would personally very much welcome if we could have at least some new member states joining, not only because of geopolitical reasons, not only because of that, but also to show that the credibility of the process of enlargement has restarted. This is another elephant in the room that I think we've not touched upon much today. There is a lack of credibility of the process, especially in the Western Balkans, and I think that we need to reinstall a sense of trust and confidence in the fact that the process is actually going to happen. Last but not least, on qualified majority voting, I might surprise you. I personally am not a big fan of qualified majority voting in foreign and security policy. I know that this is not an opinion that many have today, but I do think that, especially in foreign and security policy, the ownership of member states is a crucial asset, and that every time that we are able to decide by unanimity, which again I think is possible given political will, we should, not least to show a united front to our interlocutors that are maybe a little bit less of partners and more as interlocutors, sometimes difficult ones. I think that the more we can show our unity and portray our unity externally, the more we serve our own purposes and interests. So this is why I would be very cautious in going in that direction. And personally, I think, if I can be very blunt and I conclude, I wouldn't expect major issues on foreign and security policy in terms of unanimity decisions with the new member states or the future new member states, more than what we are facing already today.
Thank you so much again, and then I give the floor to Gert-Jan.
Thank you very much. Many questions indeed. Let me pick up where Frederica left off. I mean, there was a question about how fast and who's ahead. Well, technically, I can give an answer in that there is one candidate country that has completed the most reforms, which is Montenegro. That is just an objective fact. The question is, how fast can it now progress? Seems to be a lot of renewed momentum. But then obviously the next question is, so how would the process look like in terms of taking on board new member states? Are you going to wait until you take on board all 9, or are there going to be groups, or is it going to be one by one? Those questions are genuine political questions, but my own personal view is that we do need to take account of the fact that if countries are ready, making them wait for a very long period of time would be problematic. So on a purely personal basis, I would be more looking at maybe small groups of countries joining as and when they are ready. The credibility of the enlargement process, I'm glad the point was raised. It is an issue certainly in the Western Balkans. I think here the renewed momentum also at the EU level is clear. We will need, to be honest, in the decisions and decision-making in Council, also to resist the temptation to deal with bilateral issues in the context of the enlargement process. That's always a risk, and it could derail the process, which is why I personally think in the longer run, maybe this issue of unanimity for some of the steps in the process on which there is presently a debate should be looked at carefully. In terms of other countries, 2 were mentioned explicitly, Armenia and Turkey, of course, is a candidate country. I would like to remind everyone it is a candidate country. The negotiations are at standstill, but we have produced, together with the High Representative, a report suggesting concrete action. Turkey is, of course, a very important partner, and working on the areas that we have identified in a mutually beneficial manner would bring, we believe, many benefits. So we also hope that the discussion on this report will take place soon and that we can create some trust by working more closely on issues of mutual interest. Armenia is a different story. Here we have stepped up our support financially, economically. The country needs to decide where it is headed. It is confronted with many challenges, economic but also military. We, from our side, believe that the EU needs to stand with the country and assist it. But here the process is likely to be one that takes a path through different steps, not a very fast process of alignment as some have highlighted. I would maybe conclude by commenting on, there was a question on the negotiation framework. On this, I think our President has been clear that the Commission will be proposing negotiation frameworks for Ukraine and Moldova very shortly, so still this month. And I would like to conclude by a general observation, which is that the nature of this debate, which we're having today, and the energy in the room, shows that enlargement is back, because we didn't used to have these debates a few years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, last but not least, I give the floor to Professor Van Ecke.
Yes, very shortly. Just one point, a question of Mr. Baum from Luxembourg about the speed of the process. It's already happening, given the speed, what we have seen, the decisions that have taken place in the last 2 years. So we already are in a different trajectory. That's the first point. The second point, I think the moment of truth, as far as the EU is concerned, will be the negotiations for the next MFF, because then it will become clear whether the EU has money set aside for accession. And 3, I would go for the 2 M's. So Moldova, because of the particular situation that it currently is, and I think indeed it's very crucial as we speak. We cannot give in to blackmail from Moscow. That means that if you are not in control of your full territory, it's not a reason not to become a member of the EU. And we have 2 interesting examples. Western Germany started as a founding member, and Cyprus is a full member of the EU. So let's make that clear vis-à-vis Moscow. And Montenegro, I think, to send a clear message to Banja Luka and Belgrade, that the future is in Brussels, is part of the EU. I think this would be a real new momentum creating for all the 6 Western Balkan countries. Thank you.
So thank you all. Thank you to the speakers for your hopeful and also positive messages in these turbulent times. And you called also the elephants in the room. Also important to mention them, to know for sure which elephants we are tackling. But it's important to have that window of opportunities for this enlargement, for this reintegration, and indeed to give a real step in that European integration to all candidate countries. Thank you so much for being with us and to give your insightful contributions.